want you to understand why this happened in the first place. So back in the 20s and 30s, America moved from a primarily transactional contract sort of situation for most people, right?
Okay, so pause. When you say a transactional contract situation, what does that mean? Define this for us.
That means I would go work for Lacey, right? Or Lacey's, and I'd say, okay, I'll go work at your bar or your ranch or whatever it is.
Bar, and it's a very cool bar.
Yeah, okay. And we would make a contract between the two of us. And she would agree to pay me X amount, right? And I would agree to do X amount of labor.
Yep.
But we would have to personally negotiate that contract, right? We moved into the industrial era. It moved from that sort of situation to a wage situation where Lacey owns a factory. And instead of a
we own a factory now.
Okay.
Fine.
So instead of the kind of an individual contract that we negotiate, it's no, this is the wage I'm paying. I'm paying you this per day or this per hour, right? Whatever it is.
This job now pays blank dollars per blank.
Right. This caused a lot of problems in unions and whatnot. But then what happened was people got older and they got sick or they couldn't work. And if you're barely making enough to survive to begin with on a wage, which is what most people were back in those days, especially in the cities, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, right? That's really difficult. And so now you had a lot of these people in their late 50s, 60s who can't earn a living, have no savings, and there's no real support. So they would literally go to what are called poorhouses. A lot of them were just abandoned buildings. And these people would basically just go there to die. And this would be your mom, your dad, grandma, and grandpa. And that would happen. Millions of people were living like that in the 30s. So that was where Social Security came from. The idea was let's set up a program to make sure that these people have some sort of insurance in old age. It wasn't so they could retire on a chateau. It was just enough so they wouldn't starve on the street, right? It was very, very minimum, very, very basic. And so it's part of the reason the initial retirement age was set at 66, because back when they first did it, and whatever it was, 38 or 40, whenever the first check went out, life expectancy was 66. So it didn't pay everybody, it just paid people who ended up living longer so they wouldn't die on the street, right? So that's essentially what that whole process was. And what it became is it became a bigger deal, and it moved into trust funds. And one was the old age insurance. If I live too long and I can't afford to live, I paid into this, it pays me until I die, right? So it runs like an annuity, essentially. You get a monthly check until the day you die, right? Then they added what's called disability insurance. And this was a big deal because it covered people who were blind, which was really common after World War II. You get a lot of guys coming back that were blind. It covered people with basic disabilities who couldn't work or could do minimum work or only work part-time because they physically couldn't. And that was a big deal. It also covered children with disabilities, right? So if I'm insured, my children could get Social Security disability, right? This is a huge deal because even today, 1 in 5 children under 18 require some sort of disability or educational help. About 20% at some point between being born and being 18. And disability insurance covers a lot of them. So it's a huge deal, right? To cover making sure they get the education they can function without mom and dad going broke. And 1 in 33 children are born with some sort of disability. So this covers a lot of people. This also then included not just old age insurance, disability, but spousal. So if I die, my wife can collect my Social Security. So it provides insurance to her if she happened to be like a 50s wife, and that was the deal. We lived in the 50s and she stayed at home and I worked because it was hard for women to get jobs back then.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now she's covered. So if I die, my wife can at least get Social Security so she doesn't have to go live on the street. Right? And this continues today with spousal insurance. So there's a lot of factors to it. And then, of course, they added Medicare and Medicaid to this. Right? So now, if you're old, you get Medicare when you're 65. Everybody gets it when you're 65. Now, at least some of your medical stuff is paid for, and you can get additional medical insurance for a much reduced cost. So, like today, if you were 64 and getting insurance all by yourself because you didn't qualify for Medicaid, you were a year too young, right? A 64-year-old guy who was in decent health would probably still be paying $1,800 a month for an insurance plan. But once he's 65 and qualifies for Medicare, he gets Medicare, then he can buy the extra parts to Medicare, B, C, and D, and his medical insurance would go down to like $150 a month. So these, just to go back to it, yes. So old age insurance, disability insurance, spousal insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, right? All covered under.
Partridge in a pear tree.
Yep, all covered under Social Security. So kind of a big deal. So 65 million Americans use Social Security. I mean, are collecting on it, right? So it's a big deal, and probably like I think it was like 15% roughly of those people. That's over 90% of their income. Right. So you're talking about 10 plus million people without it would go into instant deprivating poverty. I mean, we'd literally be throwing 10 million people out on the street into the poorhouse. So it is a very important thing. Now, here's the deal. Up until the 80s, everybody paid in and then Social Security kind of paid out, but it didn't really keep much of a balance. I mean, there was some balance here and there. It wasn't a big deal. But pretty much
So there wasn't a reserve tank. There wasn't a savings account per se.
Right. Pretty much what went in, went out. LBJ made some changes to that. But then what happened was in the 80s, they realized the baby boomers, which was the largest generation, right? They were going to end up eating so much out of this that the younger generation, because they were only, on average, were going to probably be having 1 or 2 kids instead of 5 or 6 like their parents, right? They were going to have to pay for some of their retirement through Social Security, right? So they raised the rates on it under Reagan, with Greenspan and whatnot, and they created a surplus in what's called a trust fund, and they did it for old age insurance and disability, right? Old age insurance being the bigger one. So the trust fund grew, and the government has borrowed money from it and paid it back, and blah blah blah. And it's gone back and forth. We can go into the hypocrisy and corruption behind that stuff some other time, but that's a different, funner history lesson. The thing to understand is
under history lesson. I'm an English teacher. I'm definitely call you funner. Sure.
Yeah. When we actually go in depth to Social Security, I'll give you guys the 5-minute talk about how corrupt things got. Anyway.